You are tuned into the Dr. Tina Show with Dr. Tina Moore. For more, visit drtyna.com. On this episode of the Dr. Tina Show, I'm going to be breaking down 3 studies that have been coming across my desk on repeat, all about GLP-1s. Semaglutide in particular seems to be the theme of these 3 studies, and I'm seeing a lot of misinformation out there going around talking about how GLP-1s cause your heart to shrink, and GLP-1s cause erectile dysfunction, and GLP-1s cause blindness. Not so fast. Let's break down the studies with even the help of ChatGPT, which you can do too. You can actually put a study into ChatGPT and ask it a series of questions. And granted, you probably won't know all the questions to ask unless you're a doctor or you're a scientist, but you can actually start to, tease apart the study a bit so you can get a bit more of a reality check out of it than you would if you were to look at the title, which is often sensationalized. So without further ado, let's jump in. All right. So first up is the once weekly semaglutide doubles the 5-year risk of non-arteritic anterior ischemic optic neuropathy in a Danish cohort of 424,152 persons with type 2 diabetes. This came out December 18th of 2024 in the International Journal of Retina Vitreous, and everybody's talking about it, and they're convinced that GLP-1s cause blindness. For reference, there was a study that came out in July. I went over it in another episode. So we'll link that in the show notes and you guys can review that there too, because what I first want you to understand is that this condition of the vascular effects that happen to the blood vessels of the eye are way more common in those who are type 2 diabetic and obese, which is also the group of people who are most likely to be on this peptide. All right. So the people who are most likely to be on this peptide are the people who are most likely to have this issue. And basically what they did is they looked at 424,152 participants. This included only 44,517 semaglutide users in Denmark and 16,860 semaglutide users in Norway, totaling approximately 61,377 semaglutide users. So the title of the study itself scares you because you're like 424,000 people and half of them got blindness. No, that's not what happened. So 14.5% of the entire cohort was actually on semaglutide in the first place. The average follow-up period for semaglutide users was not specified in the summary, so we don't know how long they were on it. We don't necessarily know. I don't believe we know dosage on this one. And these were people who were already sitting at an increased risk for having arteritic issues in their retinas. All right. There was no control group. So what they did was they compared the same type of person, your typical obese type 2 diabetic, phenotype of person, and they compared SGLT2 inhibitors, which is another diabetes weight loss medication, to semaglutide. So they were just comparing 2 drugs to see what happened. And basically what they found was the relative risk was 2.8 for developing the non-arteritic anterior ischemic optic neuropathy, which we're going to call NAION from here on out. So the study found a hazard ratio of 2.8, which means you have 2 times the risk, 2 to 3 times the risk, essentially 2.8 times the risk. However, that was looking at relative risk. And if you remember anything about 2021, something that you weren't hearing a lot about was absolute risk. We were hearing a lot about relative risk, about some interventions, but we weren't hearing about absolute risk. So absolute risk of this was 2.19 to 2.9. So 2 to 3 cases per 10,000 person years. And the comparator group also had the incidence of NAION, but it was 1 to 1.8 basically cases per 10,000 person years. This translates to an excess absolute risk of about 1 to 2 additional cases of NAION per 10,000 person years in semaglutide users compared to the control group. The control group was the SGLT2 inhibitors. So while 2.81 increased risk sounds significant, its relative risk, it should be contextualized against the very low baseline incidence of this condition in the first place. And the absolute risk means that the vast majority of semaglutide users will not experience this adverse effect. So I'm going to leave it at that. You guys can check out the studies. I'll make sure to link it for you. There were some limitations in this, and I want to just go over them really quickly. And you can just plug this into ChatGPT too. You can use, I use something called Consensus inside ChatGPT, and this looks up studies for you, and it does a pretty good job of answering questions. So I just said, what are the limitations of this study? I think that's a great thing to always ask, because it'll tell you straight up, like, here's the problems that we see. So take this with a grain of salt, or, we really should double down on this. It was an observational study design, an observational study cohort that does not establish causation. I've talked about this at length on many of these podcasts, that correlation is not causation. It would be like if every single time you got a flat tire, you happen to spill coffee on yourself. Then correlation, that would be correlation. Like, I get a flat tire, my car bumps, I spill coffee on myself. I'm holding my coffee. Right? Any of you used to drive to school with coffee? I used to smoke, and I drove a stick shift Ford Ranger, and I would drive to school with a cup of coffee in one hand, actually a cigarette in one hand, which is awful, I know, a cigarette in one hand, holding the steering wheel, and I would be holding a cup of coffee and shifting with the other hand, and there were no cup holders. It was crazy, but somehow I made it. So imagine if we went around saying that hitting a speed bump causes you, or spilling coffee on yourself causes you to hit a speed bump, or hitting a speed bump causes you to spill coffee on yourself. It's not always a link, right? That, I know this is a crude example, but you get what I'm saying. Like, we can't say correlation is causation. I probably could have come up with a better example. There's unmeasured or residual confounders in this, i.e. other health conditions or lifestyle factors, which might explain the observed increased risk rather than the drug itself. Confounding by indication. Semaglutide is typically prescribed to patients with obesity or type 2 diabetes, both of which are independent risk factors for vascular complications, including NAION. The increased NAION risk might reflect underlying health conditions rather than a direct effect of the semaglutide, meaning they were going to get it anyway, right, over this period of time. Reliance on a registry data. This basically uses chart notes which had the NAION diagnosis. We're assuming that diagnosis was correct. We're assuming that they were adherent to their prescription medications. Like, we don't have any kind of cause and effect here. It's not that kind of study. Rare outcome and statistical power. NAION is a rare condition, meaning relatively few cases are available for analysis despite the large cohort size. But it's way more common in the group of people who are going to be on these medications. Small absolute numbers can make results more prone to random variation and limit subgroup analysis. Lack of dose and duration specificity. We don't have any of that information. It didn't stratify findings by dosage. So we don't know if the higher dose versus the lower dose. You know what I always say, and I think in all the cases that I'm about to cover, I really think dosage is an issue here. I think cranking up the dose for extended periods of time and hoping for the best may not be the best strategy. That's just my opinion. It's unclear whether higher doses or prolonged exposure increases risk, which limits clinical relevance of the study. Generalizability. The study focused on populations in Denmark and Norway, which may not represent other regions with different healthcare systems, prescribing practices, or patient demographics. I mean, it's worth noting, right? Lack of mechanistic insights. The study does not explore how semaglutide might contribute to NAION directly, like in a causative fashion, a condition linked to vascular insufficiency of the optic nerve. Without a plausible biological mechanism, the observed association remains speculative. No control for rapid weight loss. This goes back to the dosing and management issue I always beat the drum on. Semaglutide induces significant weight loss. How fast were they ramped up on their dose? How much weight loss did they have? Significant. This is why I want you to go back and listen to the other episode if this is interesting to you, because when you drop a significant amount of weight and you drastically drop blood sugar, crazy things can happen to the vascular system, and they can spasm. And so, because the blood vessels are used to having a certain amount of glucose in there. So all of these things can directly impact your vascular health. And I talk about it with a naturopathic cardiologist, Dr. Lauren Latanza. She's amazing. I just got to see her at A4M in Vegas. We had so much fun. And she does a great job of explaining all of this in that episode. And then comparator group selection, the use of sodium glucose cotransporter 2 inhibitors, the SGLT2 as the comparator group could introduce biases. These users may differ systematically from semaglutide users in terms of baseline characteristics. Differences in the population being compared may skew results. So there's just some limitations here. And you can just ask ChatGPT, what are the limitations to this study, and read it. And you guys can get way more information than you normally would, even if you're not used to going over studies. All right. So I'm not convinced that GLP-1s cause blindness. That's a big jump for people to say, but you see a lot of the sensationalized clickbait. And I'll tell you what, I know you guys are smart enough to know when you're being had, but whenever anybody sends me that stuff, I just block them, because anybody who's prone to sensationalism is not somebody that I really want to interact with. Like I interact with thinkers, and there's a lot of people that are hellbent against these peptides, and I do not know why. It's bizarre to behold, but I mean, we are seeing a decline in the obesity rates of the United States for the first time ever since they started rising in, the 90s. I mean, it was really 1990 it went in the United States. Significantly different than the rest of the world even, but all of the rates kind of came up together. France actually went up a little bit and came down, but the United States has just really taken off since 1990. I was there to watch this. Like, I was just at the middle of high school in 1990. So I was there to watch all of this, and I've watched it unfold, and it's been really bizarre to see how people react, and then particularly bizarre to see how people are reacting to these peptides. But I truly think that they are a tool to dig us out of that. And you guys know that I never talk about my personalized dosing strategy as a weight loss strategy, but I do believe that we should be still utilizing a slow and low personalized weight loss strategy with these peptides, no matter what. Like, I don't care how much weight somebody has to lose or whether they're using them for other reasons that we have data on. I think that we should go slow and low and just support the person. And I really do have concerns over the fact that if you crank up that dose to super high, you might drop a ton of weight, and maybe that's what you need to be doing. But man, you're going to hit a wall. You're going to hit a wall. It's just like, I would have patients who came in after decades of a particular hormone use, and they were relying heavily on just the hormone itself, like as monotherapy, regardless of what hormone, and not doing everything in their efforts to optimize their metabolic health. And if you don't do all the things, you're going to have to keep cranking up the dose of whatever it is you use. And you're going to eventually hit the ceiling, and there's going to be nowhere to go. And you just can't be cranking peptides at high doses and expect good things in the long run. You just can't do it. You're going to blow out your metabolism, and you're going to end up with a more brittle, frail metabolism on the other side than you did when you started, which is really shooting yourself in the foot, especially if you're losing muscle mass along the way. So any kind of extreme, abrupt weight loss, in my opinion, is a disaster. And it's particularly disastrous in those who are really in a pathologic state of type 2 diabetes, obesity, really on the more severe end. Those folks cannot do anything fast. We're not trying to slam people into the wall with a pharmaceutical. We're trying to nudge people towards homeostasis. That's an entirely different endeavor. I go through that in depth inside my GLP-1 Done Right University. We changed the name because we don't want to deal with any of the brand name mumbo jumbo, because that's really not what it's about. It's about utilizing this peptide, not the brand names. And I go into this in depth, and this course is for practitioners and it's for the general public. And the reason, I should say I let the general public in. It's not for them. It's geared towards practitioners. But I have found that in my following, I have a lot of really, really smart people. And let's just say I know health coaches that are way smarter than many of the naturopathic doctors I know. So not to say that I don't know some really smarty pants NDs, but man, my profession as a whole makes me wonder sometimes. So I want to make sure that everybody has the information that they need to navigate. And it's not just about GLP-1s. It's about the whole entire orchestra of players, of instruments that make up good metabolic health. And so I take you through all of that inside my program. And I just wrap it up in a GLP-1 bow, because GLP-1s are this magic, amazing, when done appropriately, they really, I think, are so magical as just an adjunctive, wonderful tool inside the tool belt. And they just sweeten the deal up. But there's an artistic way to do things, and there's just a really blatant way to do things. And so I just tend to nudge slowly. I do that with everything I prescribe. I nudge slowly. I'm not a big fan of slamming people into the wall. My mentor used to say, why are you trying to shoot a fly with a shotgun when you have a fly swatter? And that's a perfect analogy for naturopathic medicine versus allopathic medicine. So for all the haters out there in the allopathic world, I challenge you to be more artistic with your paintbrush. And for all the naturopaths who are still hating on me, which is super bizarre, like side note, I get screenshots of what's going down inside these naturopathic chat groups that kicked me out. They literally booted me during COVID and before because they didn't like me for whatever reason. And I'm like, what on earth did I do? I've never done anything but try to support this profession. Any of you who've been listening to me or found me on Diary of a CEO or anywhere else know that like I have done nothing but try to support this profession and the medicine that we represent. And not all the players, not all the players are my favorite, but inside these chat groups, as of late, I've been written up in several publications like the New York Times. And I had an article come out in the Epoch Times, which I actually declined. I asked them to remove my part because none of these publications will call us doctor anymore. We're all just being called whatever they want to call us. And some of them won't even credit me as naturopathic doctor or chiropractor. They just call me, the New York Times called me a health influencer. Can you believe that? Miss Tina Moore, health influencer. Like, how rude. The lady who wrote that article hasn't been alive as long as I've been in medicine. And my $500,000 in student loans, my license in Oregon to prescribe, my thousands of patients, the 4-inch needles I drop into patients' spines, and all of the thousands of prescriptions I've written in my lifetime beg to differ as to whether I'm a doctor or not. But the best part of this story, that I know this is my little side rant, a few people posted this in the naturopathic chat groups on Facebook. And I never go in there. I mean, I'm banned from some of these groups for whatever reason, but I also don't go on Facebook because it's just like a cesspool of misery over there. And I kid you not, some of them were trying to make the point like, hey, they're not calling us doctor anymore, you guys, which is a problem for all of us. Like all of us naturopathic doctors, any of you listening, this is a problem for all of us. They are not calling us doctor anymore, which means we are slowly being disappeared. They will only call MDs doctor. So what happens? It dissolves into them arguing over who hates me more. Like it literally dissolves into people arguing amongst themselves about how much they hate me. And I'm like, what a bizarro land that a group of people that I represent, that I go on some of the biggest podcasts in the world and talk about favorably how wonderful our medicine is, how many patients I've probably gotten these people who despise me. And they'll sit there and argue about details of my life they have no idea about. They just are speculating. And that's what they're worried about. They will literally cut their nose off to spite their face. And the real problem here is that we as a profession are being disappeared. But I will leave it at that. What a bizarre group of people. Maybe if people weren't so busy worrying about what other people are or are not doing and focused more on doing awesome shit in the world and contributing to the world in a positive way beyond just their little clinical practice. Like if they actually put their necks out to get cut off like I do every single day, they might actually be more successful and happier people because I lead with purpose. I get up every day and I think, how can I be of service to humanity? How can I best help you guys be more informed? Because when you're informed, you're empowered. That's why I create courses. That's why I have all this free content. That's why I have how many episodes of my podcast, how much free content how many posts do I have on social media? How many YouTube videos have I put up? How many hundreds of thousands of dollars do I spend a year to pay teams of people to repurpose all this content and put it out there for you guys? I do it because I'm trying to save humanity from extinction. And some in my profession are so petty and broke and miserable that they want to argue amongst themselves. I don't know, maybe it's jealousy. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Anyway, moving on. All right, so let's talk about, I'm not going to mention so much about the dysfunction of the region down there because we could get flagged, but just understand that this study basically, again, had some serious limitations to it. So what happened was they used, let me get the details for you. So the men in the study likely had pre-existing obesity and overweight related factors contributing to the problem, and also low testosterone. And these conditions may have confounded the observed association with semaglutide. So again, correlation, not causation. They looked at chart notes. It was an observational study as well. And they basically decided that with the use of this peptide, that potentially these men had ED and or low testosterone with use. So kind of the same limitations, right? Kind of the same limitations. We didn't get specifics on dosage. Again, the study likely examined doses within the therapeutic range for weight management, the high end being 2.4 milligrams of semaglutide. However, it's unclear if all patients were consistently using the highest approved dose or a range of doses. So I think, again, this might very much be a dosing and management issue, extreme weight loss, right? Too fast, too intense. Crushing of appetite is going to definitely decrease your intake of protein. Loss of muscle mass is all of those things that happen when you have extreme weight loss that's too fast, or you're not fighting to protect the muscle you have. You're going to end up with ED and low T. Like that's just how it is. You're also going to end up with those when you are dealing with obesity and type 2 diabetes. So you're looking at a group of people, again, already at risk for this. This is very common in men. I mean, one of the easiest ways, guys who are listening and women who love your men, one of the easiest ways to optimize a man's T level, or woman's even too, is to eat a protein heavy diet, lift heavy weights, get your metabolic health in check. There's no way any of us are going to have balanced hormones if our metabolic health is not in check. Like it's a misnomer. So you can take all the supplements you want that all the influencers want to sell you, but if you're not metabolically sound at the end of the day, like your fertility is in question, your health is in question. We have lots of studies showing, I did a whole podcast about it, talking about the benefits to the genitourinary system, if you will, in both men and women with the use of GLP-1s. You can go back and listen to that episode too. So anyway, the study was observational, making it vulnerable to confounding factors. It could not establish causality, but only an association between semaglutide use and increased risk for ED and hypogonadism. The sample size, limited sample size, especially for subgroups by age, BMI, and comorbidities, may have reduced the study's generalizability. The focus on non-diabetic males may not fully account for potential differences in response across other populations. Why would somebody be on high doses of semaglutide if they were not diabetic? Well, it's because they're obese, right? So obesity is going to definitely cause issues with all kinds of your virility. Like you just can't be fully in your power as a man when you're lugging around excess weight that's pro-inflammatory. It just doesn't line up. I mean, I've ran thousands of labs on people and it just never, like, it's pretty easy. Once we start getting the needle to move on the weight loss and we start seeing muscle mass improve with the strength training, things get real clear real fast. And then if we need to supplement or do some HRT there, then we can. But very often men are able to really optimize what they have. And so again, it's that 1-2 punch we do clinically, or I do, is like, let's optimize what we got. That's non-negotiable. That's why we have to do all the things. But then maybe we're going to use some hormones as needed, right? But we can keep the dosage of those as low as humanly possible if the person's really doing all the things that matter. So weight loss itself, rather than semaglutide, could influence T levels and ED. Rapid or extreme weight loss is known to affect the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, which may independently contribute to hypogonadism and ED. So there's a lot going on here. Other lifestyle or medication factors we're not fully controlled for. Maybe they're smokers, maybe they're sedentary, maybe they're not, there is a use it and lose it to this. So one of the women too, hear me out. There's a use it and lose it here. So if you're not regularly engaging in, you're going to have potential for ED. I mean, that's just a kind of a standard known thing in the community. So the doctors know it, whether they say it or not. The study did not explore the biological mechanisms underlying the association. It remains unclear whether the effects of T levels and ED are direct effects of semaglutide or secondary to weight loss or metabolic changes. There was a short follow-up period and it was self-reported outcomes. So anyway, you guys can check that study out. Let me get the title for you. I'll link it I don't want to keep saying the word, so I'll link it in the show notes for you. All right. And then let's see. The last one I want to talk about is, oh my God, Ozempic shrinks your heart. Okay, let's talk about this study for a minute, because this is, I haven't touched this because I've been sitting on it, because to be honest with you, this nonsense that I see supposedly highly intelligent people spouting all over their social media now, some of these people aren't doctors. They're non-doctors that seem to have a passion for Ozempic and hating on it. And I don't think they know how to read studies. So I'm going to throw them a bone and just point to their intentional ignorance, which I see a lot coming out of a few certain people. I don't know why. I'd really like to know what their monetary agenda is for hating on it so much. My monetary agenda is that I don't actually have one. I can't stand it when people lie and sensationalize things and spread misinformation. Like, I am a champion for truth, even if I don't like the truth. So yeah, yes, I do have a course that I sell, and that is so that I can educate people. So if people are interested, the opportunity's there. If there's not, there are probably 20 hours of free content. This will make 21 or more at this point of free content that they can dig into. So I'm not gatekeeping whatever I'm allowed to say outside of a pay portal, I do. But anything that is going to, be clinically relevant, I have to put inside the course for clinicians. And again, I'm letting the general public in because they need the information too, so that they know how to navigate, because most doctors don't have a clue about dealing with metabolic health. Like, they just don't. So anyway, the folks that are just hell-bent on hating on it, I always look next, like, what are they selling? Are they selling a nutrition program? Are they selling supplements? What are they trying to sell you to? Like, they'll hate on it, but then they'll sell you something that supposedly does a natural version. It's like, that's like hating on estrogen, but trying to sell you something that stimulates your own estrogen. It's like, why don't you just give them estrogen? That doesn't make any sense to me, but that's probably because I can prescribe it and some of these people can't. That's the other thing. So all right, so cardiomyocyte, let's get the title of this one pulled up here. It was a mouse study. So they looked at mice, kind of like the black box warning on the Ozempic is in rats. So let's look at this really quick. Okay, the title of it is Semaglutide Reduces Cardiomyocyte Size and Cardiac Mass in Lean and Obese Mice. Recent research has demonstrated that semaglutide reduces cardiomyocyte size and cardiac mass in both lean and obese mice. The study was published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology. Recently, it came out. This was done out of the University of Alberta. Weight loss drug found to shrink heart muscle in mice and human cells. So let's talk about the mice first. When you look at mice studies, again, they didn't give us dosing. The study observed that semaglutide treated obese mice experienced approximately a 30% reduction in body weight and a 65% decrease in fat mass compared to untreated controls. It's worth noting they did this in a very short period of time. And when they dose mice, they dose them at like 5 to 10 times or more what a standard human dose is. So dosing is a little tricky. But when I really asked ChatGPT to dig in, the way that they do it is based on like surface area of the body in the mice. And they basically cranked these mice full in a very short period of time with a very high dose of semaglutide. And they lost 30% of their body weight and 65% in fat mass compared to untreated controls. So I think we could safely categorize that as really severe and fast weight loss. What do you think is going to happen to everything in the body? Everything's going to shrink, right? We shocked the system and overdosed the mice. That's my take. They shocked the system and overdosed the mice, and these poor mice just dumped out. And I'm sure they should have probably biopsied and looked at all the different cells of the body. I'm wondering what happened to all of them. Was there shrinkage, right? Was there atrophy? Because when you induce massive weight loss and you basically hit them so hard with such a high dose that you starve them out, that they go into severe malnourishment, of course we're going to see decrease in cellular size, probably across the board. I bet their lean mass was a disaster too. So there's that. Despite these reductions in cardiac mass, no detrimental effects on heart function were detected during the study period. However, the long-term implications of decreased heart muscle mass remain uncertain. The researchers suggest that while semaglutide offers significant benefits in weight reduction and metabolic health, its impact on cardiac muscle warrants further investigation, especially for individuals without cardiovascular disease or obesity. So don't completely slam your patients with massive doses of GLP-1s in a very short period of time, because what they did to these mice was brutal. And that does not sound fun. All right. So what about humans? We have so many benefits shown in really good data for how GLP-1s impact the cardiovascular system. So go look at the SELECT trial. It's really astounding. And the bottom line with that was they reevaluated the data, and it was independent of weight loss. They looked at middle-aged folks who were obese, who were not type 2 diabetic, but you've heard me say before, I would argue they were on their way. You just don't rock obesity and not walk into diabetes. But like, they go hand in hand eventually. And they just hadn't been diagnosed yet, right? But they were probably pre-diabetic. We don't know. And they gave them a really decently high dose of semaglutide, and they monitored them for a period of time. And they saw a 20% reduction in major cardiovascular incidents. What it does to your lipid profile is phenomenal. It increases your HDL, which is your good cholesterol. It decreases your LDL, decreases your very low density lipoproteins. It decreases your overall cholesterol. It just does so many just awesome things for the cardiovascular system in the majority of these studies. So I'm not convinced that it's cardiotoxic by any means. I think that they overdosed the mice, right? So what about humans? Let's look at this real quick. Using the mice for the study, the researchers found that heart muscle also decreased in both obese and lean mice. The systemic effect observed in mice was then confirmed in cultured human heart cells. So they didn't actually look at humans using it. They cultured human heart cells and then bathed them in GLP-1s and saw a decrease. So what does that say? I'll post the study for you. You guys can look at it. Don't overdose your patients. Like, don't overdose yourself. Like, don't let your doctors crank the dose up. Put the work in. Get the strength training on board. Get your nutrition dialed in. Get your insulin sensitive lifestyle dialed in. Get your other hormones dialed in. Utilize other peptides if necessary. I talk about all of this inside my course, inside my GLP-1s Done Right University. And it's a treasure trove of information in there, you guys. There's almost 40 pages or more probably at this point of all the data that I've dug up, categorized by organ system or issue. I've got the whole strength corner in there. The metabolic revamp toolkit is in there. A 3-phase program on how to move your patients or yourself through the insulin sensitive lifestyle and how to build upon it. So what's in phase 1 to get people started? What's in phase 2? What's in phase 3? We just simply, I really don't think we need to be cranking up the dose so high. That's my opinion. Again, I do think there is a sweet, I do. I think that my opinion is that in the coming years, we're going to see a sweet spot where they're like, I think we may have overdone it in some folks and we maybe didn't need to go so hard so fast. I'm not saying some folks don't need that, but I think for the majority middle, most folks probably would do better with a more personalized strategy when it comes to their dosing. And relying on this peptide as a monotherapy, meaning the only thing on board, is a disaster. There's a whole suite of other adjunctive therapeutics that we bring on board to have the most success so we can keep the doses of everything as low as possible. And I will end with this. When I started my GLP-1 journey personally, when I went on it, and I'm still on the tiniest little dose, you guys, I'm still not on the standard starting dose. I'm nowhere near it most of the time. And I cycle and I rotate, and I talk all about that inside my course. When I started, I had been taking 2 grains of Armour thyroid a day. That's 120 milligrams of Armour thyroid for decades, for probably 2 decades. 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. 2 grains for decades. And I am now down to half a grain a day. So I am down to 30 milligrams. So from 120 milligrams down to 30 milligrams. How did that happen? Well, I think for one, it finally got my autoimmune condition under some semblance of control. And I know this because I have outward symptoms. And I've talked about this. I did a really old episode when I shared my reasons for taking this. And maybe some of you have heard it, but I have psoriatic arthritis. So my symptoms tell me, and I actually have outward symptoms. I actually get psoriasis on my scalp in a few separate places. And when that creeps up, I'm like, oh, my immune system's being funny. And I'm telling you guys, you couldn't have known someone who's tried harder with the clean diet, with the access to all of the, I have access to everything, you guys. I have cupboards and cupboards and cupboards of supplements that companies send me. I have purchased all of the things. I have all the red light panels. I have the saunas. I have the low-dose naltrexone. I've been using low-dose naltrexone personally and clinically since the early 2000s. Like, I'm not new to any of this. I have access to stem cells and exosomes and all the things. Like, I've been using all of those long before they were cool. And I couldn't get some of these things under control for myself. And guess what? The tiniest little dose of a GLP-1 does. So I knew that outwardly I was experiencing relief. I knew, and I also got my hormones more dialed in. I've talked about that. I did a whole episode on estrogen, on why I think women should really consider estrogen and start looking into it and testing before their ovaries fall offline, because there's a transition that could happen that's way nicer. And I talked about the use of topical estrogen versus steady state, like patch, and how remarkable that's been for me. I've talked about all of this in, sprinkled throughout many episodes, but all that says, and my pain is down, my mood's better. So I know my neuroinflammation is improved. I mean, it's really remarkable how different I feel when I really need to, take another dose. And I do. And I'm like, my immune system just went, nice and calm. But I'll tell you, the fact that I only need half a grain of Armour thyroid every day, and sometimes not every day, sometimes every other day. My thyroid labs are beautiful. And I used to need 2 whole pills for decades. That tells me that it's healing me. And I've told you guys this, it's anti-inflammatory, it's regenerative, and it's healing. That is how GLP-1 works in your body when done right. That's why I have GLP-1 Done Right University. So I'll make sure that you guys have a link to the course directly in the show notes, because I keep sending y'all to this free 4-part video series. You guys can find that on my website at drtyna.com/Ozempic Uncovered. It's a really awesome and informational 4-part video series. But if you guys just want to buy the course, trust me, get in there, because we're changing it up in 2025. And we're getting close to the end of you being able to get this iteration with this much content, especially if you're part of the general public. And we're certainly close to it being the last chance to get access to it if you are a practitioner at this price. So grab it if you're interested in getting it, because it is gold. There is gold in those hills. And it's really my whole clinical strategy when it comes to optimizing patients' metabolic health. I don't take patients anymore. I do occasionally. It has to be by referral. It's a whole thing. And it's very rare that I will actually do it anymore. I consult with people sometimes as well, but if you guys want my brain on how I approach a clinical case, I promise you it's unique, and it's probably nothing you've ever been taught by in school or by most of your mentors. So if you're a clinician or healthcare professional, there's great information in there based on a lot of clinical experience. That's the other argument the NDs that hate me keep making. Like, she's not in practice anymore. I promise you, honey, I saw more patients in my 10 years of very busy clinical practice than you probably ever will in your entire career. So with that said, go check out the course. I wish you guys the best. I hope that this information is helpful and it has decreased some of your concern, because I know a lot of you are on these GLP-1s and you're freaking out and you're coming into my DMs and you're like, I'm scared. I don't know what to do because of these sensationalized claims that are being made. But hopefully this has shed some light on it. And if you don't get every answer you want out of me, plug the study. I'll give you the links, plug the study into ChatGPT and talk to it. And I use, again, a plugin called Consensus. There's other ones out there, but ask it questions and get good at this, because the better you are at deciphering truth and information out of data, the better off we all are, right? If we're prone to fear and we're prone to jumping into fear the minute I get anxiety about something, I immediately go into research mode. I'm not a phenomenal researcher. I'm just tenacious and I just dig. And I want you guys to have that skill too, to some degree. Don't just rely on me. Don't just rely on what comes out of my mouth. Don't just rely on what comes out of other people's mouths. Like, go learn how to do your own research. The stupidest thing I heard in 2020 was, don't do your own research. That was like literally the dumbest giveaway to me. I was like, oh, I'm on to you guys. Really? Like, I already was, but now we're really on to it. Like, oh, we don't want you knowing anything. I want you knowing everything. I want you to be completely as educated as you possibly can be. That's the only way through all of this. I don't care if you think Maha is going to save us or if you think whatever and it's all chaos. Like, no one's coming to save you. There's any of you actually think anyone in government's going to do anything? You're delusional. You save yourself through education and through empowerment. And that is what I'm trying to give you guys. And if you guys want the deep dive, it's inside my course. If you want the free content, there are dozens of hours of it. And you guys, a lot of people are getting what they need from that. So with that, I will bid you adieu. I hope you guys have the best Christmas, and I appreciate all of you, and Hanukkah and happy holidays and Kwanzaa and all the things. Like, I hope you just have great times. It's really, to me, it's about, see, it makes me tear up. I live in Oregon, so it's so dark here and it's so rainy and it's so crappy. And this season is the season of light. So it's the light through the darkness, right? That's what we're trying to do here. So get your shit together. Get your game plan on for 2025. I've got some really exciting stuff coming down the chute for you, so keep your eyes peeled. I got a lot for just the general public in general. I know you guys need more out of me than just access to this course. And so my team and I are really excited. We're building something very exciting because we are trying to be the light in this darkness. And it's a team effort. It's a family effort. My whole family works for me. And we're really trying to bring something special to you guys through all of this influencer, misinformation, sensationalism, polarization, like fuck all that, right? Like, let's just get the truth out there. And then you guys got to put in the work and put in the time, change your life, learn what you can. And then, my mentor always said, see one, do one, teach one. So take care of your family, take care of the people you love, fight for their health, fight for their rights, and learn it and teach it, spread it forward, right? So with that, I will bid you adieu. Love you all. Talk to you later and have a wonderful holidays. Thanks for listening to the Dr. Tina Show. This is a Wellness Loud production produced by Drake Peterson and mixed by Mike Fry. Theme song is by John the Guild. You can watch the full video version of this podcast inside the Spotify app or on YouTube. As always, you can email the podcast at podcast@drtyna.com. That's DRTYNA. And if you like this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. You can also find all of my offerings on my website at drtyna.com. For more shows by my team, go to wellnessloud.com. See you next time, and thanks for listening. This podcast is for general informational purposes only. It does not constitute the practices of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. I am a doctor, but I am not your doctor. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content on this podcast is intended not to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.